Hello and welcome to this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. I am your host, DylanLasagna. Welcome to today's episode. Wherever and however you're listening to this podcast, whether it's on YouTube or Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor FM, and Google Podcasts, this show is your safe space for the most filthy casual takes on the world of pro wrestling and sports. Today, we got a special show for you all today because we're going to be reviewing SummerSlam. Yes, WWE Summerslam. Wait a minute. Dylan, you're probably thinking, didn't you review this show a couple weeks ago when they were in Nashville, Tennessee? Yes, I did, actually. But no, we're going to be reviewing SummerSlam again. And what do I mean by that? Well, we're going back in time. I haven't done these kind of shows in quite some time. But we're going to be going back in time all the way back 20 years ago when I was just 5 years old. When I wasn't even a wrestling fan yet. We're going back in time to 2002, where things were really interesting. Yes, when WWE had SummerSlam 2002. Yes, it is the 20th anniversary today of SummerSlam 2002 in the Nassau Veterans Coliseum in Uniondale, New York. And man, it's already been 20 years since that crazy event that many wrestling fans have billed as the greatest SummerSlam of all time. And, well, I of course, like I said, I was only 5 years old. I was still in my kindergarten days of, my livelihood. And I didn't become a wrestling fan until third grade. So, fortunate me. But, as a wrestling fan today, and as I grew up, I like to go back, watch the old stuff now and then. And, well, this is why I decided to do that here today and give you a special retro review in the Old Icebox, which we haven't visited in quite some time. So, with that being said, before we get into this review, into today's episode, I do want to encourage you to go and follow all the social media pages of Very Cold Lasagna on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter at Very Cold Lasagna. And listen to the show however you can, wherever you get your podcasts. So, with that being said, let's get into this 20-year anniversary of the 2002 edition of WWE SummerSlam. And I gotta say, looking back at it in 2002, even though I was only 5 years old, it was a really interesting year. Not just for WWE, but the whole year in general. There were some really good movies, like The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers came out, Harry Potter, The Chamber of Secrets. My personal favorite, the original Spider-Man 2002 with Tobey Maguire. Yes, that movie series will still be my favorite Spider-Man. And then, of course, you have that Star Wars movie. Yes, Attack of the Clones I'm talking about. Those movies were dominating the industry. And then there were video games coming out at that time, mostly dominated by Nintendo, like Super Mario Sunshine, Metroid Prime. But then, of course, you also had Grand Theft Auto Vice City also come out that year. But personally, that was my least favorite Grand Theft Auto game when I later played it in my life. But that's besides the case. And then you also had, in sports-wise, in relation to this channel, the New England Patriots and Tom Brady and Bill Belichick beginning their long dominance over the NFL. They won their first Super Bowl together in Super Bowl 36 over the St. Louis Rams and created a lot of what ifs for the greatest show on turf in that Super Bowl. What if the Rams were the one to overcome the New England Patriots? So, either way, the Patriots would begin their long dynasty over the NFL. So going back to the WWE, 2002 was kind of like a transitional year for them because, well, they were done with the invasion angle, which we covered here last year, and they had a loaded roster, and a lot of the mainstays from the Attitude Era were getting older, and, well, look, a few of them were departing from the company, and some of them were also coming back from serious injuries, such as the case was with Triple H. He suffered a torn quadriceps injury back in 2001, which caused him to completely miss the invasion. So he returned shortly before the Royal Rumble and won the Royal Rumble in 2002. And then he would go on to win the Undisputed Championship at WrestleMania 18. Meanwhile, at that same event, The Rock and Hulk Hogan had their famous matchup at WrestleMania 18. And then, like I said before, that roster got so big because early last year, Vince McMahon, the then owner of the WWF at the time, he purchased WCW and ECW. That, well, there was just simply not enough TV time for everybody because the roster was just too big. So to counter that, the company would do something that they never really had done before. They split up the entire company in half. They created the brand extension, something that you see today, even though they don't really have the large amount of wrestlers currently today that they did in the past. So with this brand extension draft, wrestlers, commentators, referees, and any other essential talent were pretty much exclusive to Monday Night Raw and SmackDown. And they were also later given general managers. So while it didn't necessarily take effect, like full effect, until like the mid 2003s, it still kind of was a notable like time. It was kind of a notable transition away from the Attitude Era, away from the invasion angle, and into a new period. But before we get into what exactly that period was, you couldn't help but thought at that time, whether you're a wrestling fan or you're revisiting this period, what happened to the two biggest stars that helped WWE win the war against WCW and, I guess to a degree, ECW? Well, of course, we're talking about The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin. For The Rock, well, he was at the point of his life where he was getting his acting career started. He starred in The Mummy Returns, and he got his first lead role in The Scorpion King as Matthias, aka the Scorpion King. So he was getting his acting career started, and after WrestleMania, he took like a three month break from wrestling to go on this promotional tour for the movie he was starring in. And yeah, when he came back like a couple months later after that promotional tour, some fans kind of took notice of his eventual part-time status, and they were getting mad. They were getting at the Rock selling out to Hollywood, which became the catalyst for something much bigger later on for Mr. Rock. Meanwhile, for Stone Cold Steve Austin, his fortunes, unfortunately, were not that great either. I'm not saying either, but in comparison to The Rock, his fortunes were not that great because a lot of things were going bad for him personally and professionally. His personal life was not that great. He would get into this highly publicized domestic dispute with his then wife, Deborah, and that ended in a divorce a year later. Professionally, behind the scenes in WWE, he had a lot of problems. He had a lot of problems with the creative direction, both his character and where the WWF was going at the time. He didn't want to fight Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 18, and it was later revealed that he didn't believe that it would stylistically work. And I don't know how that made sense, but it is what it was. And a lot of Austin's problems, having that short match with Scott Hall at WrestleMania 18. And then the biggest problem Austin had was having to put over in a hot shot match that wasn't properly built up at the time to the rising star in Brock Lesnar in a King of the Ring tournament match. So all these factors, along with Austin's mental state, his personal life at the time, that led to him walking out on WWE. And in response, all they can do was, say thank you, but also bury him on national television in June of 2002. So while they did manage to put aside their differences, resolve their differences towards the end of the year, it was an ugly situation for Steve Austin in the WWE in 2002 when it came to their issues. So speaking of the WWF, they lost a lawsuit that was filed by the World Wildlife Fund, and they they had to change their name to, well, the name that I mentioned just a couple seconds ago, and the name that many of us know today, the World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE. So they're in this new period. They're transitioning towards the period that Austin's refusing to get into. And what exactly is that period? Ruthless aggression. So what exactly is ruthless aggression? Well, there was a lot of less focus on like these politically incorrect storylines, or like less controversial characters, but there was more focus on the wrestling based aspect of the show. So a lot more not too many longer matches like you see today, but there was a lot more focus on the wrestling aspect of the show. So that brings us to a head to SummerSlam 2002 in the Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum in Uniondale, New York. This took place on August 25th, 2002, and most people remember the show for two matches: The Rock versus Brock Lesnar, or Rock versus Brock, and of course, Triple H versus Shawn Michaels. One of these matches featured like a passing of the torch of sorts, and the other featured a comeback of the ages. But what about the rest of the show? Like, even though this is for some people this was a two-match show, while others considered this the greatest SummerSlam of all time, what about the rest of the show that, well, people did that felt like this was the greatest SummerSlam of all time? How did it stack up? How did it fare? Well, we're about to take a look at it as we delve deep back into the old icebox for this retro review of SummerSlam 2002. So we kick things off in the Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum with a pretty great match. Pretty great opening match with Kurt Angle going up against Rey Mysterio. So my favorite wrestler ever. He made his first ever WWE pay-per-view debut on this night. And going into this match, well, Rey Mysterio signed with WWE in June of 2002, and they were really hyping up Rey Mysterio with a lot of vignettes. And a month later, he made his debut on SmackDown, beating Chavo Guerrero and having this huge, like, his early defining moment, jumping off the steel cage in a match where Edge and Edge and Chris Jericho were fighting, and he just jumped off the cage onto both of them, and it was just a phenomenal moment. So he got into this feud with Kurt Angle, and Kurt Angle was really doubting Rey Mysterio. He would just insult him, and Mysterio would continue to do these like sneaky and smart tactics to throw Angle off his game. So in this match, this was a great match. It pitted Rey Mysterio's high athletic lucha libre style speed against Angle's technical wrestling ability, and Kurt Angle did a really masterful job selling Rey Mysterio's high speed offense so well. Rey Mysterio executed all of his moves really well. And what I liked about Rey Mysterio first match, pay-per-view match, was that he made it so unique. He went rather than go out, do his entrance, the cameras cut to Mysterio behind Angle, and he did a Hurricanrana to begin the match. So that was pretty cool. But where they did very, very well for me was the finish. Kurt Angle countered a Hurricanrana from the top rope. He managed to slip out of it and lock in the ankle lock. And he promised to break Mysterio's ankle, and that's exactly what he did. He forced Mysterio to tap out and win the match. So sure, Kurt Angle won the match in Rey Mysterio's pay-per-view debut, but Rey Mysterio looked really good. He looked very strong in his performance. So after this matchup, Kurt Angle would go on to feud with Chris Benoit, and then be forced to team up with Benoit in the tournament to crown the first ever re-envisioned SmackDown side of the WWE Tag Team Championships where they would beat Rey Mysterio and Edge at No Mercy. And meanwhile, for Mysterio, he would go on the team with Edge. And then while they would lose to Angle and Benoit at No Mercy, they would beat them later in a 2 of 3 falls match on an episode of SmackDown before they lost the titles at Survivor Series. But either way, both men would go on to have really good WWE careers towards the future. So the first match on the Raw side of things with Jim Ross and Jerry the King Lawler was Chris Jericho going up against Ric Flair. Now, this was an interesting time. Ric Flair still like was in the WWE, and he was feuding with Chris Jericho, who jumped from SmackDown to Raw because he didn't want to work with Stephanie McMahon, of course. That being because, well, he was aligned with Stephanie earlier in the year, and now that Stephanie was kind of like this pseudo babyface general manager, he was like, no, screw that. So Jericho made his way to Raw, attacked Ric Flair after his matchup with The Rock, and then going into SummerSlam, they just continued to beat the hell out of each other. And then the 6 days prior to SummerSlam of 2002, Ric Flair would completely disrupt Jericho's Fozzy concert. Fozzy is like Jericho's band, and he would destroy all the equipment of Jericho's like concert. So that was an interesting visual. So as for the match itself, it was pretty solid. It was pretty all right. But the only thing that I thought about this match was how red Chris Jericho's chest was going to be by the end of this match. Because for most of this match, Ric Flair was just chopping. He was just literally doing the knife edge chop all over Chris Jericho's chest. It was like a one move offense for Ric Flair all match long. I mean, the crowd loved it, which I liked even more. They were like, woo, woo, woo. But like, damn, I was just thinking, how numb is Jericho's chest gonna look towards the end of this match? But for the most part, Jericho carried the veteran Ric Flair. He bullied him. He targeted Ric Flair's injured back. Jericho would even lock in the figure 4 on Ric Flair, and he did manage to make him tap out, but some controversy ensued when Ric Flair did tap out, but it was at the same time he already reached the ropes when he got the ropes for the rope break. So Jericho is furious, and then behind the referee's back, Ric Flair would hit Chris Jericho in the dick with the low blow, and then lock in the figure 4 to tap out Y2J with his figure 4. So it was a pretty solid match. I mean, nothing like too crazy. I was just laughing at how red Jericho's chest was gonna be, with all those chops to his chest. So I was just like, damn, how many chops is it gonna take? So, after this pay-per-view, the two would meet again at Unforgiven, this time for the Intercontinental Championship. But Jericho would get his return win, make Ric Flair tap, and retain the title over Flair. For Jericho, after this, after Unforgiven, he would lose the Intercontinental title to Kane a week after Unforgiven. And then he would form this on and off tag team with Christian, where they won the World Tag Team Championships. For Ric Flair, after Unforgiven and after SummerSlam, he would assist Triple H that same night in his World Heavyweight Championship match against Rob Van Dam and become his manager. He would turn heel, become his manager, and that led to the creation of Evolution with Randy Orton and Batista. So, while this match wasn't necessarily, the best at SummerSlam or like in general, it did lead to some really crazy things down the line for both men. Edge versus Eddie Guerrero, going back to the SmackDown side. Honestly, there wasn't really too much of that backstory for this matchup other than, Eddie Guerrero getting jealous of Edge and his rising sea of popularity. And other than that, when I was looking back at, like, scrolling through some of the episode of SmackDown leading up to this pay-per-view. I really couldn't find much. I really couldn't find much on this feud with Eddie Guerrero and Edge. But either way, this was still a solid match. And there was some solid storytelling as well, like with Eddie Guerrero trying to disarm Edge and his previously injured shoulder. Michael Cole and Taz did a pretty good job here as well, bringing that up. The reason why Edge had that previously injured shoulder because he legitimately injured it in a steel cage match after Judgment Day against Kurt Angle. So Eddie Guerrero also got a little creative too, doing a variety of moves to injure Edge and literally try to disarm him as well. He even did like a frog splash not onto Edge's chest, but onto Edge's injured shoulder. So that's pretty creative. But in the end, Edge managed to fight back, hit Guerrero with the spear, and win the match. So, pretty solid match. I do feel like it kind of dragged a little too much with Eddie trying to prolong the match a little too much. But other than that, pretty solid way for Edge to overcome the odds and get a victory over Eddie Guerrero. So both of these men would fight each other 2 more times. They traded victories at Unforgiven, and then in October on SmackDown, Edge would come out on top of the feud. Going back to the Raw side of SummerSlam, we had the WWE Tag Team Championships, the unbranded Tag Team Championships. Christian and Lance Storm of the UnAmericans going up against the oddball comedy team of Booker T and Goldust. So I'm gonna be honest with you. I actually liked when I went back and prepared to do this show, and I watched the UnAmericans in their short time together, watching their promos, their vignettes. I actually dug this group. I don't know why. Maybe because a lot of what they were saying about bashing America. Sure. I'm pretty neutral towards America today, but damn, they were really brutal. They really got some heat against the American fan base, and the whole basis on the UnAmerican stable in WWE was that they weren't pro-Canadian. They were anti-American. They were against the country's upside down beliefs. Christian mentioned something about how people couldn't they prefer to eat Big Macs over reading and writing and watching their favorite site, but they couldn't recite the Bill of Rights or something like that. And hence, when Test often came out with them, he carried an upside down U.S. flag that symbolized America's upside down beliefs. So I honestly thought that the UnAmericans were a pretty interesting group, and they definitely made some interesting points back in the day. And if they were in, I'm gonna be a little controversial here. If they existed in the WWE or in any professional wrestling company today, they would make some decent points as well in addressing some of the topics in today's America. Now I get it. It was a weird time for them to make this stable because, it was only less than a year that 9/11 happened, and we'll get to why they broke up so shortly. But yeah, they definitely addressed some interesting points. So going back to this matchup, Christian and Lance Storm won the tag team titles in July at Vengeance, and then later they went to Raw. Meanwhile, around this time, Booker T just got kicked out of the NWO, their failed version of the NWO, which had not Hulk Hogan, not Scott Hall. They still had Kevin Nash, but rather than have Hulk Hogan and Scott Hall around this time, because Hulk Hogan left to be a face again, Scott Hall got fired. But no, they had the Big Show, X-Pac, and Shawn Michaels. So yeah, it's so bad. And Booker T, He previously rejected Goldust's help, but after he got kicked out, he went to Goldust to combat the NWO and then later the UnAmericans. So overall, with this match at SummerSlam, this was a good tag team match. They got some good early tag team offense from both teams. It clearly showed that they had chemistry with one another. And Christian and Lance Storm brutally took it to Goldust for much of this match. It was basically a two-on-one onslaught that got the crowd really heated on them. And they did a really good job trying to prevent Booker T from getting to Goldust. And every time he got so close to getting tagged in, Christian and Lance Storm would do a good job of preventing Goldust from tagging into his partner. It made the anticipation for getting Booker T in this match more exciting for the fans. And then when he finally got that tag, the crowd was going wild. They popped so hard for Booker T. And once he got in that match, the pace just quickened. It picked up to a big time degree. So Booker T and Goldust were like getting to that point of, man, it seems like they were going to win the tag team titles here. But then when the referee was down, Test came in. He hit a big boot on Booker T with the referee down. And then Christian just slimes his way in and pins Booker T to retain the tag team championships for the UnAmericans. Now, retroactively, I would have loved to see Booker T and Goldust win the belts because they were at the height of their popularity, especially Booker T. But considering that the UnAmericans were still red hot as well as a heel group, I mean, it kind of made sense for them to retain at this point as well. But more on the UnAmericans in just a second, because there were some interesting facts about this group that will make you question, why did they only last this long? So for Booker T and Goldust, they were continuing to pursue the now renamed World Tag Team Championships for the rest of 2002. They eventually won them at the end of the year at Armageddon, but they quickly lost them back to the UnAmericans. This time they had, instead of Christian or Test, Lance Storm had William Regal. And Goldust and Booker T split at Goldust's request, so Booker T can challenge Triple H for the World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania 19. But that was a match that Booker T lost. And as for Goldust, well, he would leave the company at the end of 2003. Well, Booker T would go on to have various feuds in the mid card, and then he would make his it would make a slow descent back to the world title scene by 2006. There was also the Intercontinental Championship match between Chris Benoit and Rob Van Dam. So Invisible Man won the IC title from Van Dam a few weeks prior on Raw, but since it was considered open season, since Mr. McMahon mentioned that if Raw superstars were unhappy with the general manager, Eric Bischoff, they can go to SmackDown. And vice versa with Stephanie McMahon, if SmackDown superstars were unhappy with her, they could go to Raw. So Benoit decided to take advantage of this open season on wrestler contracts and go to SmackDown and take the Intercontinental Championship with him. But the board of directors still required Benoit to defend the title against a Raw superstar at SummerSlam. And on the Go Home show, Van Dam beat Jeff Hardy in a number one contenders match to get that title shot. So in this matchup, I like the touch that to promote this interpromotional matchup between SmackDown versus Raw, they had the two ring announcers, Howard Finkel for Raw and Tony Chimmel for SmackDown, to announce both Van Dam and Benoit to keep this brand warfare competition going. Because at the time, they were really heavily promoting the brand split between Eric Bischoff and Stephanie McMahon. So they really getting that going in 2002. And for this match in general, I mean, it was a good match. I thought though it kind of dragged a bit because I thought this match was going to end sooner than I thought it would, because Benoit missed the diving headbutt. And I thought Van Dam was going to end it right there and there with the 5-star frog splash. But then the match kept going when Van Dam missed the frog splash, and then Benoit kept going, grounding RVD with this technical wrestling. And then when he pushed Rob Van Dam off the turnbuckle into the barricade, which injured RVD's shoulder, it just kept going. It dragged a little, but I mean, it was what it was. So Benoit tried to lock in the crippler crossface and tried to make RVD tap or pass out. But Van Dam fought it off. He was resilient. He countered a top rope German suplex from Benoit into a crossbody. I thought that was a really cool finish. And then he won the IC title, brought it back to Raw with the 5-star frog splash. So overall, I mean, the match was kind of good. It was kind of slow, but in the end, the finish really paid off. So for Benoit, he would return to SmackDown and begin a rivalry that I mentioned already with Kurt Angle, and he would form this tag team, which included both of them becoming the tag team champions on the SmackDown side. Meanwhile, for Rob Van Dam, he would become Triple H's first ever challenger to the World Heavyweight Championship, but he would lose the IC title in that feud thanks to Triple H prior to Unforgiven, where he would also lose that world title match thanks to Ric Flair. So by this point of the show, after Kurt Angle versus Rey Mysterio, things were, I'd say it's pretty solid, like almost good. But for me, the crowd was mostly into it. But when I watched it, I was like, all right, things were kind of simmering down a bit. And the latest example of that was The Undertaker versus Test of the UnAmericans. Now, as I mentioned before, the UnAmericans jumped to Monday Night Raw, and they would also attack The Undertaker to make a statement. The Undertaker would exact his revenge a week later, chasing off the anti-Americans in a police motorcycle. So I thought that was pretty cool. So basically, this whole feud was about Taker defending the honor of America against, well, the UnAmericans. So overall, this match was, well, pretty simplistic. I mean, Undertaker got in some early offense. Test kind of made like a potential threat at an upset with his big man moves, but in the end, the Undertaker rallied back, overcame Christian and Lance Storm, and Test tried to win with the big boot, but he got a near fall, and he tried to win the match again, but Taker would win it 1, 2, 3 for America with the Tombstone Pile Driver and celebrate with the fans with the real American flag for the honor of America. So I mean, the shortest match of the night, and honestly, it is what it is. And it's pretty simple, straight to the point. Honestly, this match could have served better on Raw or something, but in the end, it is what it is. So going back to the UnAmericans, they went on to feud with Booker T and Goldust, but now Booker T and Goldust had some backup. They had Kane, they had Bradshaw. This was when Bradshaw wasn't JBL, John Bradshaw Layfield yet, and they also had Bubba Ray Dudley. And the reason why they recruited so much backup, well, it was because the UnAmericans, they continued to try to burn the upside down American flag. And the babyfaces were like, you're really going to do this to America. You're really going to destroy the beliefs of our good country. So the UnAmericans eventually got a new member in William Regal, and he was like the only non-Canadian. He was the only British person in the group. So at Unforgiven, the UnAmericans were defeated by the group of Booker T, Goldust, Kane, and Bubba Ray Dudley, and that began the downfall. That began the downfall of this UnAmerican group, because they would lose the World Tag Team Championships to Kane and the Hurricane, And then they would have a bunch of other losses as well. They would fight amongst each other, and the group would go bye-bye. So Christian would form a new tag team with Chris Jericho. Test would turn babyface. He would take on Stacy Keibler as his manager before he left WWE in 2004 and sadly passed away a couple of years later. And William Regal and Lance Storm would continue the lineage of the Un-Americans, but as a tag team before it permanently disbanded in 2003. Now, overall, I would say the Un-Americans had the potential to be like one like the biggest heel groups. Like, even though it was kind of like a jobber group, but I do digress to many eyes. But I do think that they could have generated a lot of heel heat at the time, especially considering that, well, yes, technically they were formed at a time where America was still trying to recover from 9/11, and I do agree with that. But it was revealed by Bruce Pritchard on his podcast in 2018 that, yeah, it exactly confirmed, like everyone to believe, that everyone, well, except for William Regal, they did not like doing the Un-Americans gimmick. They were pretty uncomfortable with it. And like I said, it was at a time where it had only been less than a year that the Un-Americans formed. It was only been less than a year that since 9/11 happened. And it was a awkward time to form that group. They were afraid of the heat. They were afraid of the boos, the hostility, that whatever they said that was going to be like anti-American or un-American, whatever they were going to say, that would have like represented their group. They were afraid of what was going to happen in response to that from the fans. So I can't really blame them for ending the Un-Americans act so abruptly. I still wonder though, how that would work in 2022. I mean, because I do believe that had that gone on just a little longer, and had Christian, Lance Storm, Tess, had they been a little more easy, and I kind of get their understanding of how uncomfortable it was on the whole Un-American shtick. Maybe it could have had someone else do it, but the Un-Americans were like kind of a team with so much potential to garner heat and win even more titles, like tag team titles per se. Maybe not main event material, but dominate the tag team scene. So kind of like some lost potential for the Un-Americans, but it is what it is. Meanwhile, for the Undertaker, he would move on to SmackDown, feud with Brock Lesnar over the WWE title, but come up short each time he met with Brock Lesnar. And then he would have his last feuds as Biker Taker with the Big Show, John Cena, Lesnar again, and Vince McMahon, before being buried alive by Vince and Kane before returning as the Dead Man at WrestleMania 20 against Kane. So this is where the event really starts to pick up, at least in my eyes. This is where the event really starts to get juicy. And that is, of course, the first of two big matches that SummerSlam 2002 will be remembered for. And that is the unsanctioned match between the good friends, better enemies, Triple H and Shawn Michaels. Now, in case you don't watch wrestling or you're not really familiar with this rivalry, let me give you the TLDR version of it. Triple H, Shawn Michaels have known each other since 1996 when they were a part of the Clique with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. 1 year later, they formed the original D-Generation X, a group of degenerates that would, break the rules and stick it to the man. But then at the 1998 Royal Rumble in January of 1998, Shawn Michaels severely broke his back during a casket match with The Undertaker, landing on the wrong spot. And then after WrestleMania 14, with his title match with Steve Austin, he went into retirement for 4 years. Meanwhile, for Triple H, he took control of D-Generation X, made it more popular than ever, and then he embarked on his own singles career, that included 4 WWF title runs. So 4 years later, Triple H is in the height of his face run in 2002. Shawn Michaels comes back as part of, again, WWE's failed NWO experiment. And after Vince McMahon decided to, you know what, we're done with the NWO, they decided to have Michaels go on, successfully try to convince Triple H to join Raw at Vengeance. And then the next night on Raw, they two seemed like they were going to reform D-Generation X. It was going to be like good old times on that fateful July, I think it was July 22nd, 2002. But then, out of nowhere, Triple H turns on his best friend and hits a skyscraping pedigree. I mean, you got to see that pedigree that Triple H hits on Shawn Michaels on that fateful July 2002 night. And then that served as the beginning, the genesis of their long, long rivalry. Because in the weeks leading up to SummerSlam, Triple H wanted to prove that Shawn Michaels was a has-been, is old, he can't wrestle anymore. And he did so by smashing Shawn's head into a car window. But that didn't stop Shawn Michaels from challenging him to a fight at SummerSlam. So here we are in this unsanctioned match, and my God, watching it again in 2022, 20 years later, it's still phenomenal. It's like one of the best examples of actual legit storytelling, not the crazy spot fest that you see where you literally have to guess where the heck the storytelling is, where the heck the characters are. This is the actual wrestling right here. This unsanctioned match right here. Jim Ross, Jerry the King Lawler were absolutely fantastic, guiding the viewer, guiding the audience on the journey, begging and pleading Shawn Michaels just give up, end the suffering. And then, like, when Triple H was dominating the match, trying to cripple Shawn Michaels with a variety of backbreaking moves. And then when Shawn Michaels was on the comeback train, when he was hitting all these high-intensity spots, like the signature kip-up, diving through a table onto Triple H, flying off the ladder with his patented elbow drop. Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler went through the highs of HBK when he made that comeback. It was incredible. It was incredible. And then you even had the referee, Earl Hebner, stepping in at times too, when Triple H tried to take things too far, when he tried to literally kill HBK in the middle of a match. So this match was literally all about Shawn Michaels not only trying to get revenge on Triple H, but him just having to survive the onslaught that he was getting from his former best friend. So this whole match, Shawn Michaels may have been away from the ring for 4 years, but he did not miss a step. He had no signs of ring rust. And sure, yeah, he could have said that this was not a regular wrestling match, and it didn't need to be. This was the prelude to what was to come for the next 8 years for Shawn Michaels. So he won the match with reversing the pedigree into a jackknife fruit roll up. But Triple H would go on to have the last laugh on that night, on August 25th. He hit Shawn Michaels in the back with a sledgehammer, and then he whacked him near the neck of Shawn Michaels' back, and that put him back on the stretcher for the next couple of months. So this was such an amazing match to go back, revisit, and this set the stage for a variety of things for both of these men. But more importantly, it set the stage for their long rivalry. It also set the stage for their eventual reunion in 2006 for D-Generation X. It also set the stage for Shawn Michaels' second coming on his comeback from 2002 to 2010. So after SummerSlam, Triple H went on to become the first ever World Heavyweight Champion in WWE. And, well, I know some people are going to be like, oh, this began the reign of terror. This is when Triple H became God. Oh. So that was because, well, people thought that way because Triple H would frequently beat out fan favorites like Booker T, Kane, Goldberg, HBK, and Randy Orton in the span of 2 years to either win or retain the World Heavyweight Championship. when all those guys were like literally at the height of their popularity. So, so make it what you will for Triple H after SummerSlam when he became the World Heavyweight Champion. So he would also begin the group Evolution with Ric Flair, Orton, and Batista. And like for the most part, Evolution was pretty successful. They did hold all the titles on Raw, but for the most part, they were just there to basically help Triple H stay World Heavyweight Champion. And well, they eventually figured that out. For Shawn Michaels, well, he made his full-time return to the ring, starting at Survivor Series, winning the first ever Elimination Chamber match and World Heavyweight Championship against Triple H and a variety of competitors. And yes, he did manage to lose it back to Triple H at Armageddon at the next pay-per-view. He went on to have a great second act of his career. That included Match of the Year candidates against Chris Jericho and The Undertaker years later. So both of these men went on to have this long rivalry, ending at Bad Blood in 2004 in a Hell in a Cell match. Pretty fitting. And then they would go on to reform the Generation X in 2006 to make Vince and Shane McMahon's life a living hell. So best friends, better enemies. This match was the beginning of it all. And finally, we're here at our main event of the night in the Nassau Veterans Coliseum, and that is the undisputed WWE Champion that you can smell, The Rock, going up against the upstart Brock Lesnar. The Rock versus Brock in this epic main event clash of epic proportions. And this match was a pretty big deal at the time. Brock Lesnar debuting the night after WrestleMania 18, and he's been on a dominant warpath ever since like that point. He won the King of the Ring finals against Rob Van Dam. He beat the likes of Hulk Hogan and Edge to make it to this point at SummerSlam against The Rock. Meanwhile, yes, The Rock went on to beat Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 18, but he was gone for 3 months since that point doing promotional work for the Scorpion King. And when he came back, he won the Undisputed Championship against Kurt Angle and The Undertaker at Vengeance to set up this match against Brock Lesnar at SummerSlam. And for the most part, Brock had gotten the upper hand on The Rock, whether it was like getting his hands on The Rock or playing simple mind games with him. So this match meant everything for both of these men. For Brock Lesnar, it was trying to establish himself as, well, as the nickname it was at the time, the next big thing. For The Rock, it was establishing himself as, well, one of the greatest, if not the GOAT of WWE, despite his ascending popularity in Hollywood. So this match, still holds up as a really good SummerSlam main event. Not for like the in-ring stuff, but like how would it serve long term? Because Brock was very dominant in this match. And even when he gave The Rock some offense, it wasn't very long. It wasn't very long as his. And I do question though how they paced this match, because they didn't, and how they like choreographed this match, because the referee had many chances to eject Paul Heyman out of the match, but like there were like 3 times where Paul Heyman got involved, and the referee was just like, no, you can't get involved in this match. Like, why don't you just throw them out? Why don't you just throw out Paul Heyman? Like, why are you keeping him around? But I mean, I guess that was rectified with the fact that The Rock put him through the announce table with the rock bottom. So, I don't know. So, The Rock nearly put Brock away with the rock bottom and almost got the people's elbow in. But after a flurry of reversals, Brock finally finished off The Rock with an F5 that would cement him, at the time, the youngest world champion in WWE history. So, this match was, well, I guess you could say, not the greatest of all time, like in terms of everything that happened, but this match was still very important. This match was all about cementing Brock Lesnar, as his nickname entailed, the next big thing. the next franchise star for WWE at the time. And in a main event match against one of the best in the business, he delivered. He absolutely delivered in dominating fashion against The Rock. Now, another notable thing about this match was how pretty much most of the fan base in New York, in that Coliseum, was turning on The Rock. They were booing him, and the fans basically were pro Brock Lesnar from start to finish, and they were chanting for Rocky at first, for the first good minute of this match, but then as the match proceeded, they threw their support towards Brock Lesnar, and you can clearly visibly see if you watch this match, The Rock was getting pissed. He was getting absolutely, genuinely pissed. He was butthurt. I don't know if watching it at first, years ago, that The Rock was just playing around, but no, he was seriously upset at the fact that the fans had seriously turned on him. It was a classic example of what wrestlers today are dealing with. But as I will get into later, The Rock eventually handled the situation pretty well. So after SummerSlam, The Rock would cut one of those impassioned promos, try to cut one of his impassioned promos to his people, but the fans in the Nassau Coliseum would try to reject them. So The Rock, who had promised that he was ending Sing Along with The Rock. So by ending Sing Along with The Rock when SummerSlam went off the air, that would lead to the genesis of what arguably is the best version of The Rock in 2003. Hollywood Rock. A sellout, selfish, asshole-ish version of what he had become, which paved the way for his return in 2003. And under his Hollywood persona, he would go on to beat Hulk Hogan in a WrestleMania rematch at No Way Out, and finally beat Stone Cold Steve Austin at WrestleMania 19. And yes, while he would lose to Goldberg at Backlash before he went on to take a hiatus, Hollywood Rock was legendary. He would go on to cut these fantastic promos, bashing the fans, bashing each and every city that he went to, degrading the fans for practically turning on him, and he sold the fans turning on him very well. He took that beef the fans had on him and made it into an exceptional character in 2003 when he came back as Hollywood Rock. And let's not forget the Rock concert, the first ever Rock concert before WrestleMania. And who can you forget the Sacramento Queens, baby? So The Rock, he would make occasional appearances after Backlash, and he would revert back to his babyface status. And then years later, he would go on to face John Cena at WrestleMania 28 and 29. And then, well, will we get that match with Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 39? We'll see. For Brock Lesnar, he would become exclusive to SmackDown and keep the WWE Championship on SmackDown, which led to Eric Bischoff creating the World Heavyweight Championship for Raw. Now, Brock Lesnar would hold the title until Survivor Series, where Paul Heyman would betray him and align with the Big Show. He would go on to win 2 more WWE titles at WrestleMania, and I think it was SummerSlam. No, it was I forgot which pay-per-view it was next year. So either way, Brock Lesnar would hold 2 more WWE title runs before he left in 2004 unceremoniously at WrestleMania 20 for a failed NFL run, but a more successful MMA career and UFC career before he went back to WWE in 2012, where he is now. So overall, this match served as at the time, it was a passing of the torch for The Rock to Brock Lesnar. And it didn't turn out to be the torch that Brock Lesnar would carry. This was still a very important match. This was still a very important main event because it needed to serve as whether Brock Lesnar could deliver, whether he could be ready to handle that torch as the main guy in WWE. And on that night, he absolutely nailed it. So before I get into my final thoughts on SummerSlam 2002, there were a couple of other notable things that happened on this night. Stephanie McMahon and Eric Bischoff, who were the general managers at the time, the first SmackDown and Raw general managers, there were a couple segments involving them where they were just watching the show together, just to promote their brand warfare rivalry. There was also a cutaway segment at the World in Times Square where Cruiserweight champion Jamie Noble was hosting a makeout session with his girlfriend, and that was kind of weird. And then there's one final segment that I want to touch on where after the Triple H versus Shawn Michaels match, Howard Finkel was in the ring and he had this self-loathing segment. And I honestly don't remember at all at any point Howard Finkel being a heel. So I was like, wait, why is Howard Finkel in the ring to announce the next match? But rather than that happening, Howard Finkel, he was basically out there praising himself just to kill time for the main event. And then Trish Stratus comes out, and Howard Finkel mentions how Trish Stratus slapped him a couple weeks ago on Raw. And Trish Stratus apologized, gave him a hug, but that was just like a setup because Lillian Garcia came out and attacked the Fink for taking her job. So I don't know. That was just kind of weird. It was kind of like a weird thing that happened throughout the night with these I guess you could call it cool down segments to get the fans out their mind before the next match. So it is what it is. So overall, SummerSlam 2002, is it the greatest SummerSlam of all time? I'd still say yes, but I thought that the undercard had plenty of solid, good matches that defined the early portions of the Ruthless Aggression. So, of course, the two money matches stole the show. It still steals the show for me. HBK's comeback, both audibly and visually, were still amazing to me. He was willing to do whatever it takes to exact revenge on his once best friend, even if it killed his back. And then the main event served that passing of the torch, even though it ended up not being one at the time. From the Hollywood sellout in The Rock to the next big thing in Brock Lesnar, these two matches absolutely delivered on expectations, and they had a solid undercard to back that up too. So, well, yeah, a couple of the matches on the undercard didn't necessarily resonate with me. I can still understand why people call this the greatest SummerSlam of all time. I still think it's a great SummerSlam. Don't get me wrong. I just don't I don't know where I can say a SummerSlam is greatest. I can't really rank a SummerSlam, but I will say that it was a great SummerSlam because not just the obvious show stealers, but of the aftermath that these wrestlers, these groups, these stables wound up dealing with. I feel like the long-term effects of these matches, going back to retro review these pay-per-views, is more interesting to me than the matches itself, because what happens afterwards ends up being pretty interesting. So overall, I thought SummerSlam 2002 was a pretty great event, and also a very important one too in the history of professional wrestling. So that is it for this episode of Very Cold Lasagna, and thank you for tuning into this special retro review episode commemorating the 20th anniversary of the 2002 edition of WWE SummerSlam. Great, but also very important event in the history of WWE. What did you guys think about this SummerSlam in particular? Whether you watched it for the first time way back in 2002 when it happened live, or you watched it sometime when you watched it retroactively. Let me know your thoughts on each and every match that happened, or a particular match in general from this pay-per-view event. So let me know your thoughts about the 2002 edition of WWE SummerSlam. But that's it for this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. I am your host, DylanLasagna. Thank you for tuning into this fine episode number 114 of this icy yet spicy podcast. Make sure you listen to the show wherever you can and however you get your podcasts. And follow the show on social media on Twitter and Instagram at VeryColdLasagna. And as always, keep that lasagna in the fridge with your takes on the world of pro wrestling and sports. And until next time, peace out.